understand your customer persona, like who is it that I am speaking to. Trying to figure out what's the pain point that you're trying to solve. It's a key to any entrepreneur's journey.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Amy Sergis. I work here at Mars in the Business Acceleration Program. And I wanted to welcome you tonight, as well as anyone joining us on our webcast. We have satellite centers and partners attending all across the province. If you happen to be joining us from Ottawa tonight, our hearts go out to you and your community following today's tragic events. We would also like to welcome outside setting up T-Bot. T-Bot is a startup that's working here at Mars. They make personalized loose-leaf tea through robotics. Their technology platform serves the growing grab-and-go market by providing high-quality, convenient, and customizable products for the busy urbanite. Consumers can create a tea blend, order a hot cup of tea, and share their blend with friends at the touch of a button. As a member of the current JOLT cohort, T-Bot's journey includes the Creative Destruction Lab, Mars Entrepreneurship 101, and placing as a finalist in 2014's Upstart competition earlier this year. And they're currently beta testing their prototype at various locations across the city. So when today's event is over, please head outside and check them out. It's pretty neat. Following our lecture today, resources will be available on our Mars website by Monday morning. Speaker slides, related articles, that'll all be in our Mars library, a summary blog post, and video. We'd also like you to be aware of our next lecture. Next week, it will be Value Proposition with Joe Wilson, our Senior Strategist in Education Technology. Joe will show you how to effectively craft and communicate the value of your products and services to investors and customers. And Joe's a great guy. I also wanted to bring your attention to an upcoming event on November 3rd, in our Global Leadership Series with Walter Isaacson. So November 3rd, Walter Isaacson, the CEO of the Aspen Institute, will share insights from his new book, The Innovators. So join us here at Mars at 6 as Walter explores the fascinating personalities that created our current digital revolution, such as Vannevar Bush, John von Neumann, Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs, and Larry Page, and how their ability to collaborate and master the art of teamwork have made them even more creative. So before we get started tonight and I introduce our speaker, why don't we do a little icebreaker following that thread of Walter Isaacson's upcoming book. Why don't you turn to the person next to you, someone you didn't come here with and don't know, and tell them your name and share with them who their favorite entrepreneur is. Today's session will be exploring customer discovery and market intelligence with our speaker, Usha Srinivasan. I have the pleasure of working with Usha as a member of her team. She's our VP of Learning and Insights here at Mars. Usha leads a team dedicated to nurturing the talents of entrepreneurs throughout Ontario through a range of diverse programs, including the Business Acceleration Program, Data Catalyst, and Studio Y. Together, they provide advisory services, leadership training, connecting entrepreneurs with program funding, helping leverage open data, and work to make online and on-site educational content accessible throughout the province of Ontario through our regional innovation centers across the province. Usha also leads our market intelligence team, which provides valuable industry-specific and timely market research to our entrepreneurs. And prior to joining Mars, she was at Frost & Sullivan, a very well-known market research firm. And in a former life, she was an environmental scientist. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Usha to the stage tonight.
Thanks, Amy. Hi, everybody. I realized that I didn't wear anything with pockets or a belt today. So I have this thing in the back of my neck with the mic. So if I'm distracted and doing this, that's what I'm doing. So very nice to see everybody here this evening. As Amy said, our hearts go out to the people in Ottawa and what they're experiencing today. So I just wanted to state that. So my eclectic background is not odd to Mars. There's a lot of people in Mars who have that kind of eclectic background, and that's kind of the reason why I'm a good person to be talking to you about this. So my collective background of these 20 years of being a scientist for 8 years and being a market researcher for another 8, and then coming to Mars and have the privilege of setting up a market intelligence team, I got to see, hey, yeah, you can fall in love with your solution, but if you don't understand what customers needs, then there's a disconnect. So that's what I bring to the table today. Before I get started, I wanted to share a little story with you about these 2 10-year-old boys who became accidental entrepreneurs. One of them just loved, my mic working still? One of them just loved to draw. He just loved drawing, and his friend was a good storyteller. So they got together and said, okay, they just did comics for fun, nothing big. And then when they were in the playground, they started getting, their friends were looking at it and they're paying attention to this stuff. And they were like, where do you guys create this? Can we read it? And so on. And then voila, a business was born. And baby Daniel became very famous. He was having all kinds of adventures and being distributed across the playground. Unfortunately, one of those young 10-year-old boys had a market researcher as a mother. Moi. So, I went in there like, guys, you can't do this. Why are you wasting time making these comics? Are you really serious about making some money? And why are you doing this? And then my son says, you know what, Mom? We've been talking to the kids. They really don't like the stuff that they're reading. They love our comics. They think it's really funny. And, we know what they're reading. And, I agree that it's not funny at all. And some of them said they would even pay their popcorn money. They're willing to pay 25 cents. That's great. I'm so excited. But you know what? The girls, they don't like our comics as much. The boys liked it better. We were going to figure out what the girls like. So 10-year-olds, just out of the blue, just talking through logically, instinctively, what the kids may or may not like, we're answering all these questions that entrepreneurs should definitely be asking. Did I understand the problem that I'm trying to solve? Do I know who else is in the space that I'm competing with me? And will somebody pay for it? What's the customer preference? Children are so instinctive, they just get it. And as we get older, we lose that instinctive spirit. I'm hoping that I'm going to instill that instinct again back in you as we go through some of the ways in which you can look at market and customer discovery. Because it's not a difficult thing. It's very logical and makes solid sense to get that information before you start your business. Okay? So what are we talking about here? This market customer discovery thing. What does it actually mean? So you all have, raise your hands, people who already have an existing business. A few. And obviously the rest are thinking about starting a business. And you kind of understand the customer base that you're going to be selling it to. You hope that you understood the customer persona or people that you're going to be selling it to. You figure out a distribution model, and then you're hoping to make some money. What is the one thing that you really need to know before you do that? Any volunteers? What's the one thing? Just shout it out. What's the one most important thing? That's right. That's right. Absolutely. Like the pain point, forget about, okay, there could be brands out here right now, like Apple or other ones, where people just need another iPhone. Not that it's actually solving a particular need. But in generally, when you're an entrepreneur coming out, new product, you're trying to figure out what's the pain point that you're trying to solve. It's a key to any entrepreneur's journey, right? And there are not a roadmap. Just because it worked for one person doesn't mean it's going to work for another person. The journey is going to be very different. You could learn lessons from each other, but it is going to be different. So what does this market customer discovery do? What does this intelligent information do? It basically helps you to de-risk it. Like you have all of these assumptions in your head about, I think, one person said this is a cool idea, and another person said, oh yeah, there's lots of money to be made. Like you have all of these assumptions in your head. That's not going to be enough to start your business. You need solid evidence. You need information. And if you follow through the right pathway, you can gather all the necessary information, change all those assumptions into facts before you spend any more money, any more time and resources. Because it's your life. You have decided you want to be an entrepreneur. So before you do that, you want to make the pathway a little bit more clearer, right? So what type of information are you talking about? This is rudimentary, but let's just state it. Yeah, secondary data, you know what that is. Everything's already published. You can leverage that. But there's so much of it, right? Like, what is the right information? How do I sieve through the complexity of what's right and what's not right for me? And then there's all kinds of primary data. Nothing to beat primary data. You could probably get most of the stuff about your market space from other reports or statistics, extract things, et cetera. But then that 40% that you actually connect with with your customers and get that deep level of insight from them of what is their need and what their view is about your product, that is the most valuable. And then you have your quantitative and qualitative stuff. Quantitative, like, whatever, number of people living in a particular space or number of widgets that was sold. Qualitative preferences of individuals and those kinds of things, right? These are a combination of this type of data. Various sources where you can get it from. So I'm going to go through a few things on sources, and then we're going to go through like a step-by-step of, okay, what is the first thing you should really be thinking when you're starting a business and how you get that information, okay? And sources, yeah, you get stats stuff that you can get from government statistics, industry data, associations. There's associations for almost every single space. You name it, from whether it's ophthalmology to all the way to welding. There's probably an association for each and every space. But they do publish a lot of trends or opinions about what's going on in the space. So valuable information you can get from that. Market research reports, other vendors who their job day to day is to look at the industry and write reports on niche spaces, so that they spend months, years, working on that space, and they have that knowledge to bring back to you. So leveraging those. Product brochures, news items, things like that. So I'm going to refer back to some of these later on and much more specific when we go through it, but these are some of the sources. I also wanted to point out, how many people here from universities or colleges here? Oh, that's a fair number. So if you're associated with either Toronto or Ryerson or any of those places, don't forget your librarians are awesome resources. We work very closely with the different accelerator programs at U of T and others in the different parts of Ontario, and they do have particular job functions within the libraries where they can direct you to important resources. Here at Mars itself, we have a startup library which has a collection of public domain resources that are curated, that you can look at various things like, how do I go and find a competitor, or what are the resources that are available for prototyping and things like that. So check it out. And like Amy said, these slides will be online, so no need to write anything down, so you can go and look at that. And if you happen to be a client at any one of those innovation centers like Mars or any of the other ones in the province, there's 17 other ones, or 16 other ones, I should say, you can access some of these market research reports if you're eligible to receive them. And typically, we work with tech-based businesses, okay? These are different secondary resources that you can tap into. And then, of course, primary research data that we talked about. There could be various types of people that you could be connecting with. It could be, maybe a professor type, academic type of person, or maybe somebody in your supply chain, maybe an analyst who covers that market space. It could be various types of people that you connect with to get the primary data. So we just talked about just data in general. The first thing that you really want to do, I would assume, logically thinking, before you go venture out, and I'm going to use the analogy of taking a car ride. It's just easier to talk about it as a journey. Before you take the journey, you're going to say, is it worth it? Is it worth for me to take this journey? Even if you have a social purpose business, you still want to make enough money to sustain yourself, right? If you have an environmental impact or a social impact. So how do you figure that out? And market sizing is actually more of an art than science. There's all kinds of extrapolations that you would have to do as a startup, especially to figure out if your space is $1 billion or $1 million or how big it is. right? It is not easy to do that. But I'm just going to go through some basics, and some of you might have seen this before or not. Like there's the whole universe, right? And I'm going to use an example because my expertise actually is in the water industry. I'm going to use that as an example throughout what I speak today so that you can relate it to your own technology. So I used to cover the residential water treatment market. You think, oh, that's a simple space, yeah, you have like the pitchers and stuff, right? Brita pitchers. No, actually, there's quite a lot of nuance in the kind of products that are in that space. So we live in Canada where we have really good quality water, so we don't think about it. We open the tap, drink the water, we're done. But there are other countries where that's a huge problem, and there are not just pitchers, but there's under the sink, UV filters, RO filters, and there's countertop stuff. So there's huge gamut of things in this space. And believe it or not, it's a $9 billion market. It's a huge market. So it's very complex with hundreds of players. So I'm just picking that as an example as I walk through that. So if you happen to be an entrepreneur and you think, yeah, I have the best UV under the sink unit, like it's low cost, I've figured out a new technology, and I'm going to go after, a market space. You could potentially sell to every single household worldwide. Nobody else has the same thing. You have all the finance in the world. You could potentially do that, but you can't as a startup, right? One level down, you think, okay, who really cares about water quality? Should I be going there? Do they really want a product that's lower cost? And so the geography comes into play, like for whatever. So internalize it for yourself, thinking about your own solution or product, the way that I'm talking through this particular one, right? There's obviously going to be competition. People already have similar kind of technologies or something else you're replacing. Maybe the channel is online or they have it at a retail. Like all of these nuances, and then the market size goes down further, right? Of what you can address or what you can expect to play in. And then further down, as a startup, like you have limited resources, limited capacity to actually make things happen. And you have this great technology, but you have to be focused. You want to go to the place that has the most need and has the customer base that wants the product. So immediately the market size you're going after becomes a little bit more limited. But it's an important exercise to do, right? To figure out, is this worth for me to go after or not? Is it too, pie in the sky kind of thing? And then there's a couple of different approaches in which typically you do market sizing. And the reason I'm talking through some of these things is this is how you make an assessment. Should I go after this space or not? Is it logical for me to do this? And if you continue on the vein of the residential market treatment unit, this space, as I said, is really crowded. There are only, you probably recognize names like Cuno or Connecticut or Brita, but there are other players in this space that you wouldn't even imagine that existed because they're just not very visible. So who's heard of Amway? And have you heard of Alticor Corporation? Probably not, but Amway is part of Alticor Corporation. This is the brand name. And they have 90% of the under-the-sink market. Nobody really knows this because they had it in multi-level marketing. They're not in the store, they're not in the retail, they don't have online presence, but they're like a hidden kind of player there that nobody realizes that they have. So they're, have people selling this stuff. So just be warned that when you're doing the bottom-up method of market sizing, it may not be obvious as to who the suppliers or players are in that space. That's all I'm trying to say. And in this particular space, 80% of the market share is owned by 100 players. So it's totally fragmented. Only 20% has about three or four large players. The rest is all fragmented. It's really difficult to figure out what's the revenue for these different suppliers that I'm going to add them all up to figure out what the market size is. It's hard to do, right? Even for market research firms, it's a difficult exercise. they do guesstimation. I mean, there's no way they would be able to connect with all of those suppliers, right? So maybe in this particular scenario, you have to do like a top-down, and it's not that accurate because it's going to be bloated numbers. You know, pick a particular geography or particular demographic of people who might buy this product, and assume a penetration rate. Like, okay, maybe 5% of them would buy, maybe replace it with something else, and therefore I hope to achieve. And you have your dollar value of what the cost of your product is in the margin, and say, okay, roughly maybe I could hope to make this kind of money. Everybody with me? So, this is how you get your estimation. And I cannot get through all of the nuances of market sizing in 30 minutes or 45 minutes that I have, but I'm just trying to tell you some elements of it so you get a sense of it, right? And we have articles on our website on how to do market sizing and things like that, so explore our Mars library. So that's the first step, right? You figured out, okay, then you've decided, okay, yeah, I think it's worth it. Like, I think this is a space that I should get into. I have a rough idea. It is important at this stage to figure out, has someone else been in this space? Is anybody else? So I'm still using the car analogy, and say, can I learn from someone else? From the space? And there are various reasons for you to figure out what the market type is. The residential one that we were talking about, it's an existing market space. Highly crowded, you know who you're going to bump into, and it's going to be an uphill battle, right? Unless you have something really differentiated. Now, if the same UV water treatment system was half the price, it was really disruptive and it's different, you could fall into the resegmented market where you think, the buyers are like, yeah, I never thought of buying this $1,000 unit. It's just so expensive, but I would buy a $200 one, right? Because you suddenly change the mindset of the buyer to say, yeah, I do want to buy something. Going away from my water example, I'm sure you guys have seen a lot of these red boxes everywhere, like in the grocery stores and different places. Yes, you've seen that, right? And you think, wow, I thought we were done with renting stuff, but obviously these guys figured it out. They thought, people don't want to go to Blockbusters every time and have this variety of things. They just want to go and pick up something right after groceries, $1.50, and it is the most recent releases. Those guys figured out something new, right? And they kept that same. When everybody was like, rental is down, Blockbuster's closing, and then imagine when they first went to the investors, like, you guys want to do what again? You want to do rental business? I'm sure they had that kind of experience with their investors, but they're doing really well. New markets are obviously when you have something totally disruptive and new. Dropbox is a good example. Google's still, not as worried about them. They're still doing their thing, and people are still using it. Clone markets are things where you find success in one space and then you try to bring it into another market. Uber is one good example, although I'm hearing lots of bad stories about Uber. Apparently there's a protest about how low the price of the fares are, and people are not happy with that. So you have to be careful, being, when you're franchising it out and building into new spaces, you have to be careful how you do that. Why is it important to know this market type? Because you need to know who's playing with you in that space, right? If you're you're thinking of different set of competitors who might be in that space versus in a newer clone space, right? So you need to know who else. I'm still in the journey analogy. You need to know who else you're going to be bumping into, right, in that journey. And knowing your competitors is key, because that's where your customers are going to come from. If somebody else is using some other product or something similar, and you have something better at a lower cost or works better or faster, that's where you're going to attract the customer base from, even if they don't know that they need it right now. Right? So that's why it's important to know who else is playing in that space so that you can steal their customers, basically. Right? And then in terms of, I'm sorry, this is a very verbose slide, but in terms of secondary research data. So each time I'm talking about the steps, I'm telling you where can you extract information from for various things. So I talked about market sizing. Yeah, you can leverage reports and so on and stats and extract information. Here in the competition, this is also tricky. Anyone in the audience here has a strong IP, have a technology-based business? Hands? One, oh, very few, a few. So very familiar with doing prior art searches and going into paid databases like Delphion and Total Patents and to do that. But sometimes you might not, there might not be any patents at all. So sometimes trade shows are really good places for you to figure out, depending on the industry that you're in, who's in the space. And you don't have to have a booth. You just buy a ticket to go walk around and see who's promoting what kind of information they have. You'll be surprised the amount of information that's there in product brochures. And if you are interested and partake as a customer, in front of them, they will tell you everything there is that you want to know about that product. That's okay. It's still ethical. You're doing competitive intelligence. You're gathering information about a competitive product. But it's the most effective way. And in some industries, you have to show up every year in these trade shows, and it's a valuable amount of time that valuable to spend that time and energy to do that. When you are dealing with the tech space, you don't know who else is doing what, right? There might be. I'm always told somebody out there always has similar ideas or ideas as you, what you are thinking about out there. How do you know who's getting traction and so on? I'm sure some of you read, Crunchbase and Tech Vibes, these kind of online technology blogs and newsletters. You can see who's getting investment, who's getting traction. That's a good way of figuring out, oh my God, this company, like cropped out of nowhere. They just got like 8 million. You're like, who the hell are they? So this is the only way you're going to be able to figure out who else is playing in your space. Because it's not published anywhere, it's hard to keep track of the volume of activity that's going on globally, right? And then last but not least, you could leverage for established companies, who are, maybe you have something, more on the scale-wise that is competing with large companies, and you want to keep track of what's Siemens doing or GE doing or Honeywell doing. What are the things that they highlight in their company annual reports, and what are the products that they are talking about more, or the markets that they're talking about more. These are nuances you can pick up to figure out, hey, they might be going in the direction where I'm interested in, right? So these are the different ways to get competitive information. Now, I'm sure most of you are familiar with Steve Blank. Like, please raise hands. Are familiar with Steve Blank? Some of you are. So he's this. We use Steve Blank's. He's a professor at in California, and he has written the Startup Owner's Manual. And we use his lean methodology for a lot of the things that we teach in the workshops that you just saw an ad for, and so on. He has an interesting way of looking at competitors. I thought I'll throw this in as well. Is you can, most of the time, entrepreneurs say, I'm over here and all of the other competitors are over here. That I'm nowhere near them. I'm better and faster and cheaper than anyone else. And Steve Blank takes it even one step further, like, I'm the center of the universe. I am the universe. So he puts a startup in the middle, and he says, okay, what are the other adjacent markets that are relevant in this space? So for this particular example, it's a company that he has coached, I guess, it create a lifelong learning network for entrepreneurs. And then he says, what are the adjacent markets that are relevant? Like, corporate, higher education. So for each of your spaces, you could do this exercise. Put yourself in the center of the universe and say, what are the adjacent markets that that are relevant, that have similar kinds of things, something education, in this case, education related. And then what he does is he asks his startups to say, put in the names of the companies that are in that market space that could potentially are your competitors. And so he populated with that. And then he gets one step further and he says, put in the dollar value or investment some of these private companies have received. Now, when you eventually get to a place where you're doing investor pitches and so on, this is going to get their attention. They'll be like, whoa, that's a very hot market. That's like 995 million invested in this thing called Chegg. What is that company? Why is there so much attention, so much interest in that space? And VCs are always, they don't want to pass up a hot market, right? Their attention is peaked. So it's a good exercise for you too, to do that, to say, who else is receiving investment? Is there more interest in a particular area than others? Should I be positioning myself in a different way? It's all about the pitch, right? How you pitch yourself, in a particular market space. And then the beauty of doing this is now this is where you're going to steal your customers from. This is where you can bring your adjacent market customers from. And therefore, you can tailor your marketing based on where they're coming from, right? So the nuance of why you have to understand your competitors has multiple layers into it. You have to understand the competitors so that you know who you're dealing with in terms of competition, but then the next layer down is, I need to know where the hell my customers are going to come from, right? So having done all of that, understanding the size, the type of the market, the competitors, the last very important thing that you need to know is understanding your customers. Key thing, hands down, right? Still going on with my journey analogy. I've said you have to get out of the car. I'm sorry, men in the audience, how many of you are going to confess to, do you actually ask directions if you get lost? Only one. Well, not very many people with their hand up, like, no, I know exactly where I'm going. I don't need to have directions. My spouse is like that. He never asks for directions. And I'm like, so in this particular analogy, you've got to get out of the car and speak to people and ask for directions and understand what their problems are and how your solution can possibly fit into that. Now, you could have various kinds of levels of conversation with customer base. Obviously, you have your core customers who are actually going to benefit from the product. But there are other people in the ecosystem that you also need to be aware of, and you might have to connect with them and talk to them as well. So you may have seen this pyramid before, and I'm just go through it briefly with you. But if I use the same residential water treatment as an example, the end user may be the husband or the wife, right? Who's going to buy the product. But then possibly the influencer could be the sister-in-law or the really close friend or the brother-in-law or someone who influences them and like, oh, I wouldn't buy that product from that company. Like, do you even know those guys? Like, so they can make or break that sale for you because of that's why they're called influencers. And then you have one other layer, the recommenders, and these are bloggers or article writers. In this particular residential water space, it could be somebody who is an authority, maybe a certification board on water quality, and there's a seal that they expect to see on the product before they make a decision. So those are people look at those recommenders for products. So you need to be aware who they are, right? And then further up the chain, I'm just assuming, I'm assuming there's a product, UV treatment under the same thing that is low cost, you're selling in Asia. Maybe in lots of joint families in Asia. So the decision maker sometimes, or the economic buyer, maybe the father-in-law or the mother-in-law of the family. It may not be the husband and wife. So there's so many nuances, right, for each of the spaces that you might be in. I'm just giving this one thing as an example. But for your markets, it could be various people in this pyramid. And you need to figure out who that is for your space and try and talk to some of these people, because the decision point of why they buy may be very different. The process that they follow or the decision that they make may be based on different information to the actual customer. Water quality is important, cost is important to somebody else, right? So that is important for you to consider. And then in terms of resources, obviously face-to-face or telephone interview is the key in this space, but I'm just going to point out that there are existing information that you could leverage that are published, whether it's trying to understand a particular geography that you're not familiar with, or trying to understand the differences in people's, even if it's an app, An app that's really successful in the US is not going to be successful in Japan. There are people's preferences and differences. You need to you need to understand that before you get into a market space. I actually found that, talking about Uber earlier, another company in Asia, similar model as Uber, got $18 million funding just a few days ago. Same model, but going like gangbusters, crazy. But they must do something different that is, making having it be more successful in that space. So you need to understand the nuances of the industry. There are organizations like the ones that I mentioned, like Forrester or any of those market research firms who do these big omnibus studies for other corporate players who have lots of money and they, spend, $500,000 doing big surveys and so on. As a startup, you don't have that luxury, obviously, but you could leverage some of that data. It may not be specific to what you are looking for because your space is very different, but it might give you a little bit of an idea of what's happening in that particular geography or kind of people, what are teenagers looking for, or are video games of particular type more interesting to a particular demographic. Whatever your innovation is, it will give you some sense of what's going on. We talked about industry associations before, that's still relevant. And sometimes I feel even though we live in an online space, in a web space where everything is there for you to look at, in some geographies, if you don't know what is that one person you need to build a partnership with, or the one person that you need to know as a connector, because you need an on-the-ground person, you're not going to get anywhere. South America and Asia is kind of like that. And we do have, I'm sure not sure if you're familiar with DFATE, which is the Canadian Trade Commissioner's Office, the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. And they have representatives in different parts of the world where you could leverage their resources to say, what I'm trying to sell into this particular market is, what on-the-ground information they can give you, okay? So it's good to leverage these kind of resources. And then last, of course, is the primary research, and we'll spend a little bit more time on that. Now, I strongly believe in face-to-face interactions and interviews, and that's why that's kind of highlighted. You need to see people's pupils dilate as you're talking to them. Are they excited about what I'm trying to tell them, or are they really bored and they're talking about something else altogether? So you need to have that interaction. However, sometimes you could use online in an effective way, if you like, depending on what your product type is. And you could create a mock website, easy ways to do that through Weebly or Google site. There's lots of tools out there. You could create a simple kind of site, invite people. First of all, when you create it, nobody knows it exists, right? You need to actually invite people to it, like either your immediate circle of people that you know to get feedback on something, or you buy lists. I would advise you don't go that route until you really understand your customer persona. You can't just simply go and blast people with things. There's privacy rules and all of that now, and you have to be careful. But you could use surveys in an effective way if you like. And there's lots of different tools, for B2B and B2C, fluid surveys and SurveyMonkey and things like that. That you can even embed the surveys on your website easily enough to get feedback from people if you like. But beware of respondent quality. If there's a 15-year-old out there who realized that, hey, I can get paid, I can get money from answering this survey, you're not in a good place. He could be, you're not the quality of the person on the other side. You don't know who that is, right? So just have to be careful about the emailing and so on. Listservs and specific interest groups. I find that if you're for example, the National Business Incubator Association has a listserv. I find that when you're there are interest groups or listservs for different types of functions, and when you pose a question, literally asking that question to thousands of people. So there might be some groups like that you might want to leverage for your industry, and it could be different things, right? And then crowdfunding platforms, and I don't know if Amy's still here, but she's been looking at this space, and is the value, we've been looking at it, is the value for funding platforms raising the money or actually getting feedback from your potential customer space about what the product should look like. You're indirectly getting some feedback, right, from the what they like and don't like, and perfecting your product a little bit. But we're still, some there have been successful campaigns, and not many of the Mars companies have had successful campaigns. But you have to be careful when you're making that ask. Be very clear about the ask that you have on a platform is inclusive of all the things that you need. Like, if you get suddenly, wow, 1,000 units that they want from people have signed up, like, did you include the cost of manufacturing and shipping and all the other things that you need to do before? So was the ask equivalent? You have the money and make profit on top of that. So you have to be careful about going onto platforms, and have a strategy before you get onto crowdfunding platforms. I think it's more about getting customer feedback more so than anything else, and leverage that. And then the direct interviews, like I said, nothing to beat that. Of course, if you're nervous about talking to people, you've got to get over it, because you can't do any interviews if you're going to be nervous. And maybe start with friends and family first. Get them to talk about if it's an issue that they can particularly speak to. If it's a consumer product, they could probably help you with some of that. If it's a business to business, maybe talk to a office mate, or have them refer you to somebody else, and so on. And then before you set out to actually do those interviews, make sure you've spent enough time developing a persona for who is it that you're going to speak with, right? You don't want to have interviews with people who are not the right type of people. Say, for example, you have a high-end product and you're talking to a person who's really frugal. Like, that's not going to make any sense, is it? So you have to be clear about, is it a male, female? Like, be really specific about who is it that you want to connect with. I mean, sometimes it's difficult, and you might get it wrong, but that's the whole beauty of doing interviews, to get perfected and get to a right persona type, whether it's B2B or B2C, to be very specific. And there's lots of templates out there that you can use to create persona types before you venture out. I actually have the good fortune of teaching a more extended market customer discovery class as part of a certification program at University of Toronto, a certificate of entrepreneurship, and it's a 15-hour program. And there the students actually do the work. They create the personas, and then they create the list of the people they're actually going to interview, do the interview, make mistakes, come back. And so you have to do that exercise to get anywhere. And just a few pointers, and these might seem like really simple things, but it makes a huge difference before you set up your face-to-face interviews, because you get that one chance, and then if it didn't go well, it's going to be hard for you to pick up the phone or set up another meeting with that person, right? So try and get as best as you can, the best interview setting as you can. First, like I said, understand your customer persona, like who is it that I am speaking to? And if you're asking for referrals, it's always better, right? Rather than cold calling or randomly, texting, sending notes to people on Facebook, not a good idea. So, some kind of referral is probably good. And in that referral, you can ask the person, like, what is this friend like? What do they like? What are the kinds of, what kind of day do they like? What kind of work do they do? Get to understand them as best as you can before you call them, so you can talk about something that's similar, maybe that breaks the ice, basically, with that person. Simple things, but important, really important to let them open up. Always set up a time and expectation for the interview. Maybe you call them, set up the interview. Maybe you get them on the phone. You'll be tempted to just do the interview right there. Don't do that. Please don't do that, because then they'll be distracted. You'll be half-assed, information. I'm sorry, I'm swearing. Information from them. You don't want to do that. You want to sit in front of them. They're relaxed. You get the right kind of information from them, and you want to prepare. And you have to also set an expectation to say, I'm only going to take 30 minutes. This is not a sales call or a sales interview. I hear that you have expertise in this space, or you're knowledgeable. My friend said that you are really knowledgeable in this space. You know what? Flattery always works. When you say that, they'll be like, oh, really? She said that I'm really good and I'm really knowledgeable in this space. Oh, sure, I'll meet with you. That always works. It's a good hook, right? People just, yours perk up. And then before you get to the interview, prepare something, prepare things, be organized. These are simple things, very important though. Have a template to record your answers in. Have a set of questions. Now you'll be tempted to go in and like, I have this thing, I have figured this out, I have this widget, it can do this, and let me show you. You'll be so tempted to do that. That's not the point of the interview. The point of the interview is to understand their pain point. You have an assumption that they're having struggles with X. And you're going to probe them with questions to understand if that X that you figured out is correct or not. Now, there's no such thing as a bad interview. If you keep thinking, wow, I think this 1, 2, 3, 4 are the problems, and they don't mention any of it, you'd be like, wow, this interview sucked. They didn't say anything that I thought was the problem. They're talking about something else and this, and like, you know what? That's your opportunity to say, my God, maybe I got it completely wrong. Maybe my product needs to solve that. Maybe I need to tweak it, and like that's the problem I'm solving. That's not a bad interview. That's somebody's giving you insight. Listen and take it in, because it's hard to, being a scientist and we having had some products that were commercialized. You think, oh, don't call my baby ugly. You're like, how dare you? So you don't want to hear that, right? You want to think like, I have the best thing ever. But it's okay. Listen to them and say, maybe, they have a point there. That's not the problem I'm solving, something else. So those of you who are really nervous, don't be, because you're not going to be doing the talking. You're just going to ask questions and then listen, right? So the more you listen and the more you understand your customers, the better for you. Don't have a recording device. People don't like it. People won't be honest, so don't use it, even if it's on the telephone. Just have a buddy with you. Maybe it's a partner from your company or someone else who can take notes, and you can just concentrate on looking at the person and taking the information in. But different ways. But don't record things. But then after the interview, make note of it. Respect their time. And another important thing is, but when you have had a good interview is then before you even talk about your solution and you've just been asking them about their pain points and so on, they'll be like, you know what, it'd be so good if we had this thing, that would just save me so much time and energy. I'm just so irritated with this problem. They're like solving it for you, and then like, well, by the way, actually I have this. And then that I've been working on, like, would you like to see it? That's the time for you to maybe talk about your solution and get their feedback. And these are the kind of people, if they call them evangelists, right? These are the people who really are excited to hear about your product, who thinks that they might even buy it at a certain stage. So these are people to get good referrals from. They could be asking you for, you could ask them for other people who might be having similar kind of issues that they could refer you to. And they're also great people to have for your advisory board. In the way down in the future, they might be one of those people who really truly believe in your product. You might be coming back to them multiple times. At the end of the interview, you want to say, do you mind if we chatted again in a couple of weeks? I'd really appreciate your feedback on the product that I'm building on. They would be great at that, because they suddenly take on this advisory role and help you build your product, basically. And then the work is actually never done. You're constantly going to be refining and asking questions and refining and maybe. There are various tools actually where you can take all the qualitative information and quantify it. What I mean by that is, you take things like, what are the key things? Are they going to buy in the next 30 days? Or do they feel really excited when they hear about my product? Or did it really hit a pain point that they wanted? So if you had categories and you have rankings of 1 to 5 or whatever for each of those, and at the end of the day, after 10 interviews, you say, wow, 3 of them was really low and the other were really high. Like, what did they like most about my product. So you have a way of figuring out what was different in that interview process. That's what I mean by taking qualitative information and quantifying it. And there are templates out there. There's a book called Lean Analytics that you can look at for that kind of templates, if you'd like, to help you to do your interview process a little bit better. And at the end of the day, after all of that work, you figured out, yeah, it's worth for me to go into this market. There's some money to be made. I know my market type and the people that I'm going to bump into. I know exactly the kind of customers that I'm going to sell into, and I'm speaking to them and understanding their needs. You've identified a need that has to be solved. You figure out how to reach them. You do your business model in terms of what is the revenue, how is my revenue model going to, is it subscription, is it one-time sale, is it whatever it is that you figure out. And then you've gotten to a point where, yeah, you've figured out all the different steps, but you've used all of this data from people or existing resources to make those decisions in a sound manner, rather than, hey, I believe that this is going to be the right way. So the whole point of this particular segment is to say, you can get there, but make it in a more logical fashion by using information effectively, right? And boom, you have your business model done. I used to do this presentation way down in January timeframe, and I'm doing it a little bit earlier this year. And I hope that we realize that this is an important step in all entrepreneurs' journey, to really spend some time looking at information before you do the deep dive into anything. And this is why we moved up this presentation, and we would love to hear your feedback, I'm sure, on the placement of this in the whole series as you go through this. And that's it for this evening, and that's my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions if there's any.
It's Hugh from NORCAT. I happen to be in town at
Hi,
this time.
how are you?
Hi. One of the things that I thought was most impressive is that you did bring this forward, because if you don't think about your customer, you don't think about your client, you're doomed. You can have a great product, it'll sit on a shelf, or service for that matter. So with that in mind, I have 3 thoughts for you.
Okay.
1, go to your local university. Find a department that's working on something. Those people know their onions.
That's
They're
right.
going to get out there. They've been to conferences. They've seen new things that are happening around the world.
That's right.
Go to your RIC. Go to your Regional Innovation Center. Ask them for ideas. Ask them if anybody else is doing this.
Yeah.
And number 3, you discussed pain. If you're in business and you're dealing with a big business who services you, I guarantee they're falling down on something. They maybe aren't doing service to a particular piece of equipment that you have in your facility, or providing a service that you once had from them. Well, guess what? Maybe you can do it better. So grow that business.
Absolutely.
Take that pain and make it into money in your pocket. That's
right. Thank you for that. And we have a satellite center actually in NORCAT in Sudbury as well, and I think they're online, are they? They should be. They should be online. So hello to NORCAT if they're listening to me. Any other questions or comments? One other person.
Hey, great presentation, by the way, really very insightful. You mentioned using tools like online surveys to kind of get a grasp of what people are thinking, what potential customers are thinking, and are you solving a pain point, and yada yada yada. But to kind of paraphrase, the common saying, there's no fun in games until you have $1 in your pocket, right? So how do you take all these great responses, and you're getting 95% of your users, you're like, yes, I'm on the road, and this is gonna be a great product, and then come time to actually selling it, you're getting 5, 10, maybe 15% of what you thought it was. So how do you take those, grand, nice things you see online for your online surveys and kind of bring that down to the real world?
This is why the online surveys can be, deceptive in terms of, what kind of feedback you're getting. I mean, I wouldn't say to go online right away at all. You have to start from the face-to-face interactions first, build up a rapport of, to be honest with you, Steve Blanks actually challenges a startup to say, come up with 100 names. and be like, 100 names? I can't come up with 100 names. There's no way I can call 100 people. But I bet you if you looked at your Facebook or LinkedIn or any of your connections, a soccer team, you could come up with 100 names easily. So that's your main starting point. And then those are the people that you should be surveying because you've already spoken to them. The random, people you don't even know the face to, emailing is not an effective way. And maybe that's why the conversion rate is not as good. Actually, there will be another, I don't know if it's next week or the week after, there will be one seminar on the stickiness. How do you retain the customer? Saying just yes is not going to convert into an actual sale, right? Well, there's probably some disconnect there. That means you haven't quite understood the problem or the price point is not right. There's something off there. This is why going back to that interaction, face-to-face interaction, spending more time there before you bring them online to further refine the product. Even, I don't know if you guys have heard of the author Ash Maurya, who's another one who has the lean canvas, which is similar to the, kind of similar or a play on the business model canvas from Alex Osterwalder. He wrote his entire book in that fashion. He first had a launch, like a launch page, and he had a picture of his front cover of his book, potential book that he hadn't written, and he had table of contents. And he just sent it out to his network of people like, if I wrote something like this, would you be interested? If so, put your email down. He got that. And then he went one step further. He actually wrote chapters. Then he went and did workshops in those locations where they were interested. So it's not going to happen. I hope I'm answering your question. It's not going to happen right away. It's going to be a discovery process of fine-tuning and getting to the right customer base.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. Hi there.
Hi there, Usha. Really great insight. I have two questions for you.
Okay.
Regarding the research part. So you said, first of all, score the qualitative response, turn them quantitative. So how do you do that? Because I did attempt to do that in the past, and I have had good results, but it's really haphazard. Is there a good way? Because when it is qualitative response, if I try to codify it,
Yeah.
I may do it right, I may do it wrong. So
there are a couple of templates that I can direct you to. So Steve Blank himself has a really great template in his book, in the Startup Owner's Manual, and also the Lean Analytics has a really great template. So you cannot just simply have 10 questions and then try to put rankings on. Is it a 5 or did they, is their answer favorable or not? That's not going to yield a really good conversion from qualitative to quantitative. Instead, you have to pick specific criteria that you think are going to be important for your business. Is it the conversion rate? Is it the excitement? Is it that you meet their pain point levels? Is it because it's going to solve a business problem for them? You have to pick those areas, and then if they hit on each of those when you ask those questions, then you give them higher or lower marks based on what. So that's how you convert the qualitative to quantitative, and those templates would probably be helpful.
Got you. A second question is, so your point number 1 was to refine your survey questions and try again. So here's the problem. I have my initial survey questions, and as I fine-tune my questions, they change. So meaning that I don't have matching questions, so how do I reconcile that?
The core values of what you're trying to address should not change, but how you ask them might change, right? And it depends on the circumstance, what that is. But you're not going to suddenly have a whole bunch of new set of questions. That's not what I mean. How you ask it might be different in terms of refining the way you ask it, right?
What if as I make progress in my market research, I realize that there are new criteria that I omitted in the past, meaning that now I'm fine-tuning and changing the key criteria.
Sorry, I apologize. I didn't get the last part.
Because I have a little bit of a cold. Basically, my question is, as I fine-tune, as I interview more people, I come to get more customer insights.
Right.
So initially, I start off with a set of hypotheses, which may be completely overturned as I interview more people.
Yes.
Meaning that the set of criteria that I believe
Then you
are
will
important.
have to change if you're not even hitting the pain points of what, if they're telling you through the interviews, this is what I said, no interview is a bad interview, and if they're telling you that that's not the problem that they need solved, they're fine with they're using some other tool and they're okay with that, and something else is an issue, then you have to stop and look at your criteria and say, am I hitting the right set of things?
Great.
So that is the right point to change that.
Usha, we have a question online, and I
online.
think we'll probably end it there. Are you going to be available for
I
one-on-one?
will be here.
Great.
For
Sorry, we'll just take this one more question.
Okay, question online is Apple's mantra is don't listen to customers, which is the opposite of your listen to customers. Do you think they still interview people?
Who said that? Sorry?
Apple's mantra is don't listen to customers. Do you think they still interview people?
Absolutely they do. That's just bull. If Apple thinks they created that magical product without even talking to customers, I don't think that's true. So they're a big company. They don't need to, they've created people who are just, followers, lifelong followers, and therefore they can be arrogant about it and say, yeah, we don't talk to people.
All right, thank you, Usha. I think you've made it pretty clear that this is such a crucial point in your company development process, and especially at such an early stage of development, and it pays huge dividends in the long run.
That's
so thanks
right.
for your time, and it was great to see you again. And I hope you all join us next week.